to the Daily Objective. We're going to be talking about Balkanization and specifically focusing on the United Kingdom and all of those countries / kingdoms / whatever they are and whatever they will come to be. Your two favorite hosts on the show couldn't make it today, but you got me and Nikos Rucka.
Hi, everyone. So today we talk about the case about the independence of Wales and Scotland. So there's also the case of Northern Ireland, but Ireland and Northern Ireland is such a big discussion, we need an episode in itself. Now, why is this relevant? First, because there's discussions about a new Scottish referendum. Scotland had a referendum in 2014 on whether it would be an independent state. This means leaving the United Kingdom or having a different relationship with the United Kingdom. And Scotland voted no, but now they want to vote again. So why do we care? So many people in the United States talk about the need for national divorce. So you have many conservatives saying that United States cannot really accommodate the different worldviews of conservatives and progressives. Therefore, we should go our separate ways. And many libertarians are quite excited with the prospect of an independent Scotland or an independent Wales. So we're here to discuss whether this would make sense or whether this is another form of tribalism or an opportunistic political project without much to celebrate. So this will be our focus today.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with this, I suppose. Generally in the culture, among thinkers, among people you talk to, they tend to see that there are basically two options. There's sort of tribalism at a local level, and it doesn't need to be, cannibalism and sacrifice and socialism. No, these can be free market people. These can be just generally individualistic, enlightenment, pluralists, however, classical liberals in how they want to see society structured. But generally, they let's say they want to see your square 100 miles or even your square or even just your country be kind of like what defines your culture. And that's one option on the menu, people think. And the other option is globalism, where basically you have no relationship to anybody nearby that separates, that makes it special, that makes you special, a special bond with them. It's basically just, we're all living in one world, globalism, there's no culture, there's no tradition. A lot of them would also say then, and you dispense with religion, you become materialistic, everything becomes about how cheap your goods can become. So we measure everything in economic, like the buying power of your dollar, etc. So we're getting cheap goods when we import, but we're losing our identity, quote unquote. So basically globalism versus sort of local nativism, I guess, would be like the two options. So whenever you tell people, I don't want to be galvanized, I don't want to be balkanized with my state or with my region, I'm an individual, they get, oh, you're a globalist. You want corporations and a one world government to run things, quote unquote. Those are the two options people tend to see.
That's a very good identification. So let's see in which case the case for Scottish and Welsh independence fall, because it's quite peculiar. For example, Scotland wants to leave the United Kingdom but join the European Union. So in which category would you put this? But let's give first some historical context. So Wales and Scotland, many centuries ago, they were different kingdoms. They became part of what today we call the United Kingdom under circumstances mostly of being occupied by then England. But the interesting thing is that today their claim for independence is not based mostly on ethnic or any racial grounds, or any cultural grounds, or at least this is not in the forefront. They're mostly based on some interesting pragmatic claims that we'll examine. The other interesting thing is that within a generation or within two generations, the voices for independence have risen significantly. Put into perspective, in the late 70s, when there was for the first time a referendum in both Wales and Scotland asking people, do you want the devolution of power to Wales and Scotland? Wales significantly said no, like who cares? No, we're good with being part of the United Kingdom. And Scotland voted yes, but the attendance to the referendum was so small that actually the yes for the devolution of power from Westminster, London, to put it this way, to Scotland failed. These referendums took place again in '97 under Labour, under the newly elected Labour Party of Tony Blair. And this time, the referendums voted for devolution, which means more power to local parliament. So now Scotland has a local parliament, Wales has a local parliament, and they also have their own so-called first ministers. Nicola Sturgeon, for example, in Scotland. First minister is the equivalent of, let's say, quote, the prime minister for Scotland. And they have authority on issues of domestic policy in terms of some laws, some level of taxation can be decided, local rules, and things like that. But they have no say on big issues such as, for example, foreign policy. So this is where Scotland and Wales are. Now, why do they want more independence? I'm going to give you the main arguments, and we're going to go through them one-on-one. So the first and the main argument is that the election results are not representative of these regions. Put simply, Wales every time, to put it very simply, votes Labour, and they end up with a Tory government. In Scotland, almost every time, recently, they vote for the Scottish National Party, which is a weird amalgam of nanny-state leftist politics with some Scottish nationalists. And yet they found their prime minister to be a Tory, Boris Johnson or whoever was. So they say, look, we vote for something and we find someone else. Most of us vote for a particular policy, and we end up, because other people in a different place voted as a majority for a different policy, we end up with policies that we don't like. Therefore, independent means we're going to get the policies we want. So what's your take on this argument? Is it legitimate?
Can you summarize the argument in like a sentence again or so?
The sentence is Scotland votes for a specific policy in vast majority, let's say a left-leaning policy, but because in the majority in the rest of the United Kingdom, and mostly in England, votes for a different party, they end up with a party in government of the United Kingdom, and accordingly with policies that they don't like. Scotland votes left, but the UK as a whole votes right, and they find themselves with a right-wing prime minister and right-wing policy.
It sounds similar to what Americans kind of go through, you know, like the most populated states are also generally the most leftist liberal states like New York and California. And many people in America say our values are not being represented, like our votes are basically not being counted because these two big states, they have so much sway. The big liberal states might answer, well, we're also paying the most taxes. We're the most wealthy and the most numerous. We're paying the most taxes. So I could understand in certain contexts that a region, the people in a region want to secede. They want to be independent for the purpose of a particular policy. But there shouldn't be that big of a consequence. Like there shouldn't be that much of your life that's affected by if your government is, you know, the local Scottish government or the UK. Are the Scottish or the Welsh, are they driven by like some real principles of how a political system should be, or is it just kind of like incidental that right now they're moving in this direction, and 20 years from now they could be swinging in a different direction? Because only when you really have principles do you really have a reason to want to be really independent. Like if the objectivist said we're moving to Alaska and we want to be an independent state, I would say that's a good cause, because I know they're going to install a good government and it's going to be backed up by a healthy culture that philosophically stands for what that government is doing. And that's a good reason to want independence. I would know that the objectivists are not pushing for this because of any kind of like nativist sentimental attachment to a particular geographical region. So it's all about what motivates people, I would say.
And indeed, and I was thinking also this. So the same argument could be made for any country. So, for example, you could say my town voted for X policies and we ended up with a government with different policies, or my neighborhood, or my village, or my building block. So, in a way, why don't they draw the actual logical conclusion, which is that what your neighbor wants to do shouldn't have an effect on you? not on the level of law of Scotland, but on the level, the smallest level. As Rand says, the smallest minority is the individual. So I sympathize with the argument, but I would draw it to its logical conclusion, which is your neighbor should not have a say on your life. So the solution is not a Scottish independence. The solution is a political system where your life is in your hands and your neighbors have no say on your taxes or on with whom you can sleep with, what you can put in your body. So the first argument is, in our view, then actually doesn't stand the scrutiny. The second argument has to do with economic opportunism, and it's based on the idea that Scotland has a lot of untapped oil around in the sea. And actually, when this oil was discovered, this was the time when Scottish nationalism also was on the rise. This was around 40 years ago. And actually, there was a campaign by SNP called It's Scotland's Oil. And the idea was that if we, as Scottish people, would make use of this oil, then Scotland would become richer and would flourish as an independent nation. Now, it would be interesting what would be the policy of the Scottish National Party these days, because they're flirting with the Green Party. But what about the argument that, look, potentially we could be a rich nation. We have oil in our soil. This is our oil. Therefore, hands off our oil. We're going to be an economy based on the oil. We're going to be rich.
I understand the argument. But at the end of the day, what claim do you have to this region, really? You, the individual, obviously don't own an entire country. So what makes you and a group of other individuals get to say this is our region? And look, I try to avoid these types of arguments to say, unless you're a laissez-faire capitalist, complete individualist, you have no claim to anything, because ultimately your arguments fall on their face. And if you uphold altruism and ethics, then ultimately everything you say falls on its face. I try to avoid those types of arguments, but those are it is true at the end of the day. This is why philosophy matters so much. This is why ultimately altruism and collectivism, I suppose its manifestation, ultimately wins out. And when it comes to a group of people saying, look, this is our tradition, this is where our families and our ancestors dwelled, and we have a right to close the borders, or we have a right to declare independence from this larger region. I understand like the emotional kind of force behind it, but also like, I guess before we even get to do they have a right to do this? Like, why is this so important to you? Like, is this all that life can be? Like, is this all you want out of life? Is just another generation of walking your sheep across the same mountain? Maybe. But what claim, again, I guess now when it comes to, do you have a right to do it? Do you have a claim to do this? I mean, you don't. I mean, you do need, ultimately, everything you love about life, everything you love about Scotland, ultimately can only really be protected with liberty, with real liberty, with, modernity, enlightenment, individualism, and an intellectual culture, like a culture where thinkers do heavy lifting, and it seeps out into a healthy culture that is willing to, fight for liberty politically and militarily if necessary. Like, those are the things that actually will protect the way of life that these people are saying they love so much. If ultimately they really do cling to nativism and tradition and this sort of collectivist premise, ultimately it doesn't really matter if they get swallowed by the larger continent or not. Ultimately, they're going to get one of two things is going to happen. Either everything's going to fall apart, and ultimately they're basically going to really be one with the land, and everything will fall apart and they'll be miserable. Or more likely, when they're done fighting about this, they'll see that the next generation is shrugging all this off and saying, you know what, we like the iPhone, we like travel, we like immigration, and we like global capitalism, and we like pop culture. So those are the two things that I think will probably happen anyway.
Right. And think about other countries who did the same thing. We said, look, we have some rich underground, we have oil or whatever, and this is going to solve our problems. How did this turn out for Venezuela? How did this turn out for other countries who mostly base their wealth on their natural resources. Saudi Arabia is another example. Well, you could say Saudi Arabia, they are rich, but that's not that's a society which never really developed in the proper way that they should. Of course.
And we know where and we know where Saudi technology comes from, and their protection. The fact that they haven't been punished for their shenanigans comes from American weakness and European weakness, and again, philosophy is sort of the driving force behind it all. So even to look at Saudi Arabia or any country with nationalized oil, you can't look at them in a vacuum. You need to consider the larger context. Ultimately, the Saudi family are just a group of playboys, riding the coattails of more rational countries.
Now, based on the economic argument, if I were to vote in the Scottish referendum, I would vote completely opportunistically. I would vote yes. And when Scotland would leave, I would say bye-bye. Because, again, it has the worst nanny states. So the Scottish National Party is one of the worst parties in Europe in terms of their disdain for individual rights. They have some very Orwellian policies. So I wouldn't really miss them, to be honest. So I'd rather have an England that is not politically taken back by the SNP. No offense to my Scottish friends. Also, the average person in Scotland is a net recipient of £2,500 per year. And in Wales, they are the net recipient of £4,400 per year. So a significant amount. So these countries are actually benefiting from they are being part of the United Kingdom. And again, they both vote significantly left, but particularly in the case of SNP, it's the worst kinds of nanny state left. So my strategic choice would be, look, if you want to go, more power to you. Anyway, another interesting argument and for me, the weirdest one, the one that I cannot wrap my mind around. So there's new there's new momentum for Scottish referendum after Brexit. So Scotland says we want to be part of the European Union, but also we want our independence from from UK because we want to be a sovereign state. Now, for me, it's quite different to put these two things together. Definitely, Scotland doesn't want to join the EU because it appreciates the free movement of goods and people and services. Because, again, they're a very left-leaning local government. So I cannot understand what's their beef with Brexit. And I cannot understand how you can put under the same policy, we want independent from the United Kingdom and we want to be a part of the European Union. Since they are dismissing whatever is good in the European Union, which is free movement of goods and services and people.
Right. Look, the governments have too much power, and, incidental temporary disagreements among people should not determine the borders and the political map, how the political map looks. Ultimately, everything we love about life, everything we want to preserve is going to only be preserved with a philosophical revolution. And that doesn't mean that in the meantime, people can't legitimately say, look, I want, let's say, Scotland to be independent because the left is ruining Scotland, just to throw out an example of something someone might say. I can understand that. Look, maybe Brexit had the potential or has potential. I don't really pay close attention, but maybe Brexit had potential to increase capitalism, to increase individualism in England, just to give you an example of like what could have been. So if that were the case, I would say, yeah, sure, vote for Brexit. But I mean, from the look on your face, I'm guessing that's not how it turned out, or maybe Brexit never even ended up being rolled out. Every time I hear about Brexit, it's just like I just hear frustration and disappointment.
I've done many stupid things in my life in politics. The biggest L was Brexit because it literally cost me thousands. As a person, it cost me a lot of money. So what we saw with Brexit is that it was the worst of possible worlds. So the United Kingdom actually did not go for a more liberal trade policy with the rest of the world or cutting the red tape. They actually said, look, we're going to have our own rules and regulations. And now that I think about it, this is one of the reasons why Scotland want to be part of the European Union because they appreciate, for example, the red tape when it comes to environmental policy and environmental legislation. Another reason why I have very little, if not zero, sympathy to Scottish independence. And let's go now, though, to the most difficult question, which is also an area which objectivism, there are many questions. And this has to do with foreign policy. So when you ask many objectivists, what would be a legitimate thing to vote in an election? Obviously, you taxing me is not an illegitimate point. You violating my individual rights is not a legitimate thing to put on the ballot, but foreign policy is. So, for example, it makes a difference. It makes sense that you could have two rational people, imagine Yaron and Leonard Pico, for example, who might disagree on foreign policy, and this would be relevant to go to the ballot and say, I agree more with Yaron, you agree more with Leonard Pico. Now, what Scotland and Wales says is that we want to have our own foreign policy. And at the moment, we are stuck with the foreign policy of Westminster, with the foreign policy basically of whoever is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And we want to have our own foreign policy. I think this is quite a sympathetic argument, which I find appealing. What do you think about that?
I mean, foreign policy, just like domestic policy, should not be a complete blank check for politicians or for the mood of voters to determine. There should be a principled approach to foreign policy, and it should be very simple. It should be one of the most simple things in politics. But really, domestic policy should be basically pretty simple as well for the most part. You know, protect lives and property with the occasional blurry issue case to deal with, to try and figure out. But as long as we have a lobby system, as long as we have the types of governments where it's unclear what is the job of government. So is it the job of government to send aid around the world? Is it the job of government to kill bad guys, but also supply the people there with food? Is it the job of government to pay one group of bad guys to fight another group of bad guys? Is the job of government basically, I mean, yeah, the answer in today's culture is yes, all of the above. Just everything's range of the moment. You see a pragmatism manifest. You see pragmatism implemented, just like you said Brexit cost you thousands. We see tariffs and nativism having practical consequences in America when we're running out of baby formula. My understanding is the consequence of not importing dairy products or just not importing whatever, like just not having free trade. So look, anytime we have a lobby system or anytime we have a system where there are no principles governing the government, then it's like, don't ask me exactly which political party to go with right now. The answer is we need philosophy. We need political philosophy. We need a media that is healthy and honest. We need artists that are inspiring us to better ourselves. Like, we need a culture that wants something better than what we have. And that's basically how I would answer, which foreign policy to go with. I guess in the short term, look at what each party is offering and go with the one that would do the least amount of harm. And that includes the philosophical consequences. So maybe, let's say, the Libertarian Party would implement the policy that you like the most, but the intellectual effect it could have, the defaming of capitalism that might bring about should also be taken into consideration. Yeah, part of what a lobby system does, part of what mixed premises in philosophy and mixed premises in government does, is it puts us in these lifeboat situations. It puts us in situations where there really is no right answer. And I tend to just say, let the Scots and the Welsh and the British or the English, let them argue. Let them fight among themselves. I'd like this to not really be my problem.
Okay, so I will end with a hot take in terms of the merits of localism. But before that, I will give you the last argument, which for me is the most, I don't get it, which says that Scotland wants nuclear disarmament, and this is why they want to leave the UK. Now, I have no idea why a country that has, the idea was the more nuclear weapons you have, the more it puts you into the risk of war. But anyway, this is an argument that this has mostly to do with the history of the anti-nuclear movement in the UK. So this is not really, this is more like political rather than an independent argument.
So
now let me finish. Yes,
well,
yes.
You're saying that the Scots want to disarm themselves, and in order to do that, they need to be independent. I mean, I would disarm them and not let them be independent. I would just say, you want to be disarmed. We're not protecting you as an independent state. But I don't know. I mean, it just sounds. I mean, that's a perfect example of how philosophy is the motor of history. How thinkers rule the world. That the fact that such irrational ideas could lead to people to actually take action and to push for that type of move. Now, it really tells you everything.
Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. So they would say, look, the foreign policy of the UK has been adventuristic, therefore we don't have much to do with it. I understand that, but how this is related with one's nuclear disarmament, particularly when you still have enemies in the world, I don't get this. Okay, now the case for quote being in a country with people who are more quote like you. So there are cultural elements that fit particular personalities, so to speak, or they're closer to your values. So for example, I really appreciate in Greece this idea that people want to cheat on the state. So for example, you go to the dentist, they don't give you receipt, or you can find a good doctor because they tax evade, they're cheaper for you, or things like that. Or last week I was on a road trip in the Greek countryside. There was this cafe in the mountains. They were smoking inside because like, okay, the police never gonna come here. So you could say, for example, that I wouldn't be happy if Greece was in a, let's say, federation with Sweden, where they have completely different view on the state. So I understand this idea of I want to be together with people who think more like me, even for their own reasons, and they try to keep, let's say, the state at arm's length and all that stuff. So there is a case to be made for being close to people who are culturally closer to you. Again, what I see though in the case of the Welsh or the Scottish referendums are more arguments that are in the opposite direction, which is that we want to have more of a collectivistic policy, or we want to have a say on how we run our lives, but it's a say that is not based on the idea that it is that they think alike, but they think alike in a direction that I don't like. They want to be more left-leaning. And again, I kind of get it. And I think it would be good for people in England, for example, if Scotland takes its leftist nanny-state politics and leave. So I am a bit more sympathetic, I guess, than the average person in the objectivist universe on the prospect of some states breaking up when it is towards the direction of more freedom, even if it is by accident. Life is too short to live it with people that want to have a say on your life, or to say they want to have a say on issues such as how you run your business, or whether, I don't know, from the simplest thing, whether you can smoke in a cafe while you watch football.
Yeah, look, there's definitely reasons to want to live in a certain country and to not want that country to be overrun by an alien ideology or by a culture that doesn't share your values. But again, I would say always look at the motivation. Is the motivation for a good life for the individual, or is the motivation based on fear and lack of confidence? Generally, I would say the reason that a lot of objectivists are pro-immigration is because they know, and I agree, I think, a confident culture is welcoming to aliens who will assimilate. But a culture that is not confident, a culture that is ashamed and embarrassed, altruistic, apologetic, will tell immigrants, retain your culture, you're better than us. That's what we see from Western countries towards immigrants. So what is the answer? Close off immigration and just cling to tradition, as we're seeing the right saying? I would say no. I would say they're not being selfish enough. People individualistically should want a better life, and that comes from something much grander than tradition. It includes taking some good things from your particular ancestors, but also plenty of things from other people's ancestors. I'm reminded, we did an episode where you said something like, the uncomfortable question that somebody asked was, if Greece had open immigration, would it still be Greece? And maybe the answer is no. But what makes Greece so special? It's special to you because you grew up there, but but maybe, I mean, it's sort of an accident that it looked that way and had that particular group of people. And with the spread of individualism and capitalism, you'd have wonderful, beautiful people from all over the world moving to Greece, people leaving Greece and going elsewhere. You end up with a better world for you and for me. So I understand sentimental attachment to something, but again, it's like I said earlier, like what gives you the right to demand that the world preserve your particular geographical integrity if you're not pushing for individual rights, if you're not pushing for capitalism? Then what gives you the right to have independence?
It's like that scene in Atlas Shrugged where the factory is leaving and this average businessman says, hey, why are you doing this? Don't we have a right to have jobs here? Why is the world changing so much? But then again, open immigration, particularly from when you have people who have clearly a very, very different code of values from yours, raises other questions, which we will not answer here. And also, even within, again, the objectivist movement, there are disagreements. When it becomes available, I encourage people watching Harry Binswager's talk from this OCON on the issue of immigration.
I understand. Yeah. Look, I understand people that in today's context, they're saying like, don't tell me be an individualist while a culture that doesn't understand individualism is taking over my neighborhood. Let's say they say, I mean, now maybe a lot of times they're exaggerating, but again, I'm always asking, what is your end goal in mind? Is your end goal to promote capitalism, individualism, or did you give up on those things as we've seen from the right in the last decade or less? Like have you given up on individualism? Did you give up on capitalism and what you called libertarianism? You gave up on all of that and you're just saying, well, when we tried being individualists and the left used it against us, so now we just need to basically hand it all over to the to the populist state, and they're going to protect us from the bad guys, the immigrants.
That's Dave Rubin's line. There was a tweet where he literally said exactly this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Super chats. We got a few.
Go to the super chats. Yeah.
And then call it right. All right.
Yeah.
Free trade with 26. Thank you for that. That's the Swedish thing, I think. Marilyn with $3.99 and Bonnie with 99 cents. Thank you. Then Jonathan Honig with $9.99. Thank you for that. Good to see a lot of greenery in the chat room. That means they're members. And speaking of members, we're going to have a Discord meeting right after this. Link in the chat being posted as we speak for members of the YouTube channel. So if you're a member, you may join this very special Discord discussion with us. So might want to become a member. If you're not, you're missing out on the best that life has to offer. And that's kind of the ultimate theme here of today's topic. If you want what life has to offer and you're willing to use your mind in order to achieve that, I think a lot of these complicated questions become a lot easier to answer when you actually are being selfish. But when you're being scared and short-sighted and evasive, then your problems only grow bigger with time. How's that for a closing thought?
That's a short clip material. Okay, I'm such a boomer. I don't even know what Discord is. I see a link in front of me. I don't even know if I should click it from my computer or from my phone. Anyway, Boomer Nikos will find out what Discord is straight after. Oh, I can use either search our producer. Okay, so I'll see you in Discord, whatever that is, in a couple of minutes.
All right. Thank you all. See you back here tomorrow for the Daily Objective, and goodbye.
Thank you.